Hello world, I'm Chris Pirillo, and I'm currently hanging out live with my patrons, and you can become a patron by heading over to chrispirillo.com. I'm answering questions, I'm interacting, I'm doing it, thanks in large part to the people who truly support me and care to hear about my experiences, my opinions, my perspectives, my choices, and I'm very grateful for that. As many of you know, I have been quite critical when it comes to software experiences for the past 25 years or so in my life. 25 years. It's been about that. I don't think that's ever going to change. I believe that hardware is only valuable thanks to the software that powers it. I've had lackluster hardware shine with great software, and I've had amazing hardware become dulled by lackluster software experiences. I have not been secretive in terms of my disdain for Apple's current trajectory in relation to quality control of their software experiences. It is not a problem that has escaped some, though many continue to believe that it's not an issue. Those are the individuals who care more about hardware than software. I am not that kind of individual. It's one of the reasons why I don't really do a lot of gadget reviews, and it's really one of the reasons I don't surround myself with a lot of hardware, because quite honestly, it's not interesting to me. Hardware is good. I get it. It unlocks experiences. Technology is not a destination. It's an enabler, but I only need a certain amount of technology in my life. I don't need an unlimited amount, because what could I do with all that? It'd be like having 5,000 flathead screwdrivers when you only need one, if they were all kind of the same. And for the most part, technology works that way, especially in relation to computing experiences, personal computing experiences that we've kind of grown accustomed to. For the most part, they're the same. If you can do something on one platform, by and large, you can figure out how to do it on another platform. That's not always the case, but browsing the web, scanning social feeds, photo editing, you name it. A common task can typically be addressed on any platform, which is great, because we now have certain experiences that I certainly didn't have when I was growing up, when PCs were so incredibly unique and so incredibly expensive. At least for that day in time. I decided to dust off my trusty Nexus 6P. I received this from Huawei a while ago. It was a sponsored post. Huawei had reached out and they said, "Hey, would you like to try a Nexus 6P?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely," because at that point I had a Nexus 5. Before then, I had a Nexus 4, which you might remember. I can't remember which video it was, but I shattered my Nexus 4 in a video. I was doing it live, recording it live, and I dropped something on it. It was like a stand or a charging dock station thing, and it just smashed the Nexus 4. It was so sad. But I got a replacement Nexus 4 because the Nexus 4, for the longest time, was my go-to Android experience. Got the Nexus 5, that was my go-to Android experience. The Nexus 7 replaced that by and large with a go-to Android experience. And so I was very grateful to have an opportunity to use some newer hardware to better unlock the power, promise, and potential of Android. And I got to tell you, I've never really been drawn in to what Android might have provided as much as others have. In fact, some of my earlier experiences with Android were horrific. At a time when some people were claiming that Android was an iPhone killer. No. Android has never been an iPhone killer. Until, I guess, the past few days, really, with the release of Google's Pixel product. I don't have a Pixel. I would love to try a Pixel. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm not going to spend money on a Pixel because it would probably be overkill for me. But I would certainly look forward to getting a chance to try it. And I think if I were to do a test of living on Android and not living on an iPhone, as I've done for the past 9 or so years, I think that would be the device I would use. I am in experiencing Android Nougat 7.0 on the Nexus 6P, which I installed almost immediately. I am considering leaving iOS to be iOS and hoping that Apple will really start paying attention to what drove a lot of people to Apple's ecosystem in the beginning, and it wasn't because of hardware. What I'm saying is, I've tried Nougat on the Nexus 6P. It's not a primary device. It's a secondary device. I've installed a handful of apps that I might use or might need. And yesterday, I enrolled this device in the beta program such that I could use Android 7.1.1, which I believe is pretty close to the shipping version of Android on the Pixel. What I'm about to say may be very controversial, because some would argue is very subjective. I would argue that it's very empirical. I find, this is so hard to say, I find that Android Nougat 7.0, 7.1.1, let's say, the latest version of Android, which I have on my device, not a challenge when you're talking about Google's products outright. I find that Nougat 7.1.1 is by and large a smoother experience than iOS 10 Beta 5 of 10.1 on the iPhone 7 Plus. Android on this device still does have a fair amount of jitter and a few frame drops. The Snapdragon 820 processor can't necessarily keep up. It's one of the reasons why I'd be very, very hesitant to move or try living in the Android ecosystem for a week outside of Apple's ecosystem, at least as far as pocket computers are concerned. It's ample. I find that Android runs very well. Android on the Nexus 6P runs better than iOS on the iPhone 7 Plus, or even the 7. So I really want to explain to everybody that you can take your synthetic benchmarks and blow them out your ass, because they don't mean anything. I don't care if the iPhone 7 is allegedly the fastest smartphone in the world. It ain't acting like it. Ain't acting like it. I totally just took the wind right out of my own sails there. So the reviews of Google's Pixel are out now. Reviewers have had them in their hands. They're starting to ship. You can now order yours if you want. I have, again, no immediate plans to do that. And the reviews are pretty much saying everything that I was expecting them to say. And talking about the software experience, though it's not perfect, I can tell you that the fluidity of Android schools Apple. The design ethos of Android, and we're talking again Nougat, 7.0 and higher, at least in the 7.0 range, what we've seen, 7.0, 7.1, it's a better experience. Oh, man. Android, Google does a better job than Apple with design. Google's done a better job with optimization, software optimization, than Apple has. Not perfect. It is absolutely not perfect. And I realize there's a few things that are at play, right? We've got the software on one end and then the hardware at another end. But it's one of the reasons why never before has there been an Android iPhone killer. The iPhone killer is the next iPhone, effectively, or has been. Not that I'm saying iPhone is a has-been. But it's just shocking to me to find a more fluid experience in general with animations and transitions. Scrolling is where there seems to be a discrepancy between iOS and Android, specifically iOS 10 versus Android 7. I have to always underscore that because we're talking about version numbers and software and hardware. The value of what Apple allegedly has, and this is what many of us have known for quite some time, is that it controls the hardware and the software. But it doesn't seem to be acting like it. Seriously, like the biggest value Apple has in this ecosystem is that it controls the hardware and the software. It's one of the reasons why if Google really plans on doing it this time with Pixel, that's the equivalent to Apple, as close a corollary as could be found. Because Google controls the hardware and the software and can continue to do that as the Pixel program continues to evolve, as I hope it does, to give Apple some true competition. But even in kind of controlling the hardware and controlling the software enough on the Nexus 6P, Android 711, it's just a better experience in general. It's a smoother experience. It jitters. Scrolling is absolutely not perfect, and this is, again, an area where, as I understand, that has been somewhat mitigated with Pixel's hardware in conjunction with Android as a platform, eliminating a lot of that scrolling jitter that could be perceived. Some people have really equated it visually as smooth as iOS could be. And I say could be because it no longer is. And it's a dramatic change. And this is where I speak, yes, from the heart, but with empirical points to back it up. I mean, I use the iPhone and kind of get accustomed to the jump, scroll, jump, frame drop, scroll, jump, and you kind of grow accustomed to it to the point where it's almost invisible. The distractions become invisible. It's like a pain. iOS is like this dull pain that you have in your shoulder, right? And you know it's there and it hurts, but if you don't think about it, you just push through. It's there, but you don't think about it. That's iOS. It's a pain in the shoulder, right? And then like, God. Oh. So in comparison, I'll put it down and then I'll set out to do some tasks on Android. And I find almost immediately, wow, I'm having a smoother experience. I'm swiping, it's clean. Slow swipe, it's cleaner. Bounces, animations, just cleaner. No frame drops, or hardly any. I mean, they are there. And it's very prevalent with scrolling. Very prevalent. Jitter is very, very prevalent in scrolling. But by and large, it's a different kind of jitter. And it's odd to say, but I almost prefer it. Oh, man! Because the frame drops and the frame rate inconsistencies on iOS are just so haphazard. You don't know when they're just going to poke you in the eye. Android, at least with my experience, has been somewhat predictable with that. It's one of the reasons why jitter, frame drops, frame rate issues, animation, speed, scrolling, one of the reasons why I just could not accept Android and have not been able to, honestly, for a number of years as a primary device. But Google's fixed that. I find the design ethos of Android, and I said this with the first release of, I want to say, was it Marshmallow when I first started saying this? It may have even been before. Kit Kat? It may have been. It's been an iteration or two, but recognize that Material Design was just a fantastically more compelling, beautiful, just well-designed construct compared to the slop that we've seen from iOS since the unleashing of iOS 7 and beyond. So I'm just providing this update because I wanted to let you know where I am, right? I'm caught in between iOS and Android. And I'm finding myself being pulled further and further away because the experience is just, by and large, on this singular device better. A problem comes in when you try to get this device to work with the other devices that you might have. Google doesn't have that nailed yet, to my knowledge. They don't have the entire ecosystem experience that I might need. But it may work well enough. I would definitely see some sacrifices. Now, some would say, why didn't you do this before? Because, it's kind of like, why don't you switch from grating your face with a cheese grater on one side to the other side? That's kind of what switching platforms can be like. It's not as simple as just dropping one device and picking up another. It's moving from one set of problems to another. It's just that iOS's problems continue to mount with every release. Like, I can't see Apple correcting course. They're throwing out new features at breakneck speed, theoretically. Breakneck speed, every year, new features. But haven't even polished the things that they've got to the point where even if it was polished before, it becomes unpolished later. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Unless you're talking about an Apple that just does not care about software. And I've seen absolutely no evidence to believe otherwise. Some would say, wait for him to fix it. How many more years is that going to be? No, dude, I don't know. Apple's doing more to push me away from Apple than Android's doing to pull me into Android. Okay, I'm sorry. iOS, Android, Apple, Google. Companies, platforms, products. I've had a great experience with Android Nougat on the Nexus 6P. That's what I want to tell you after using it for a couple of weeks now. It's not a daily driver, but it's shocking to see how better it performs compared to iOS on allegedly better hardware. I say allegedly because, on the spec sheet, it's faster and it's got this and that and this and that and benchmarks and blah. Who cares? This quote unquote slower piece of hardware runs the software better. See, if software and hardware don't work in lockstep, there's a problem. So, as much as Android has got its fair share of problems, iOS does too. It's just that for me, those are starting to outweigh the benefits, the problems on iOS. So I'm watching the Pixel experiences with great interest. Would be curious to know if anybody has the Pixel, what they think. The problem is I can't believe what people say about any of the issues I perceive because many of them don't see the issues the same way that I do. As someone who's really more of a software guy than a hardware guy. Because I've been told for years, it's better. It's like anybody says, try this coffee, it's better. And it's like, dude, no, this is not good coffee. So software to me is like coffee. Like, I've got a palate, right? And my palate suits me, and your palate suits you. I almost have to see it in person, so I think that's probably my next step, and I'm almost afraid. I'll tell you, I'm almost afraid of seeing it in person. The Pixel. Because Android is, I think, finally positioned to overtake iOS as a leading world-class platform, as in the best experience you could possibly get in software today. And there are certainly a fair share of shortcomings that come along with it on either side, including privacy, security, ecosystem. A lot of these variables are certainly at play. It's not one is clearly better than the other outright, but I think I'm really happy with iOS. Sorry. Nougat, Android version 7.11. I'm quite happy with it. Quite happy. I really like where Google's going a lot. So if you are someone who cherishes design and finer points, I think Apple is not really doing what they used to do on the software front. With Apple, it's never been about the hardware. That's the thing. It's never been about the hardware. That's not what won me over. It was the fine attention to detail that no longer exists, and that ended the day that Steve Jobs died. anybody who says otherwise isn't really in the game, so to speak. The great game. Game of Thrones, no. Yeah, so it's just an update, letting you know. Those have been my experiences, my thoughts, my feelings. Take from this what you will. I find Android 7.0 to be a better experience than iOS 10. I'm going to continue to answer questions from my patrons now, including this question. If you want to join me, you can head over to chrispirillo.com, sign up to become a patron right now, get that bonus and other bonuses. chrispirillo.com, just click a link. I'm sure it's somewhere in the description. Today's free highlight was brought to you by all of my active patrons from chrispirillo.com. If you want access to the full TLDR episodes, both audio, video, past, present, and future, which can be up to an hour long or longer, with even more tech insight from me, plus other bonus content without ads, and support me at the same time, you can sign up to become one of my supernomies too. This is just a brief taste of what I'm producing for you. Again, get more through chrispirillo.com.